This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a renowned actor who is perhaps best remembered for his portrayal of Elliot Ness in the 1990s hit TV show The Untouchables, and as Dr. Harold Abbott in Everwood. But over the past 4 decades, he's brought us dozens of other memorable roles. On the big screen, he played Geena Davis's boyfriend in the Long Kiss Goodnight, and he was Abraham Lincoln in the 2013 movie Saving Lincoln. Some of his other movies include Second Chances, Brokedown Palace, Dirty Deeds, Bonneville, Lucky, The Bachelors, A Million Little Pieces, and the terrific short film Imagine, for which he was named Best Supporting Actor at the Filmed in Utah Awards, and he was nominated for the Award of Excellence at the Winter Film Awards. On television, he's had recurring roles in numerous shows, including The Pursuit of Happiness, The Guardian, Parenthood, Chicago Fire, Spin City, Scandal, Promised Land, and Perry Mason. He's also starred in some great TV movies and miniseries like Because Mommy Works, From the Earth to the Moon, Down Will Come Baby, If You Believe, When Good Ghouls Go Bad, and A Neighbor's Deception. And he's guest starred in dozens of classic TV shows, including Murphy Brown, Roseanne, The Larry Sanders Show, ER, Family Law, NYPD Blue, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Grey's Anatomy, and many more. Our guest has also starred in many theatrical productions, including translations, The Playboy of the Western World, What the Butler Saw, Candida, The Courtship of Carl Sandburg, At Home at the Zoo, and many, many more. Over the years, our guest has received numerous accolades, including the 2011 Award for Excellence in the Arts, bestowed upon him by his alma mater, DePaul University in Chicago. I am delighted to welcome Tom Amandes to our show. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Harvey.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You grew up in a small town near Chicago, and you graduated from the Goodman School of Drama, which is now the theater school at DePaul University. Who were the actors you looked up to as a young man?
Oh, that's pretty easy. When I moved to Chicago, so my folks are from Chicago, and when they began raising their 11 children, of which I am the middle child, so I'm the best adjusted. They started raising us. The only place they could afford a house was practically in Wisconsin. So I was actually born at a hospital in Wisconsin, so my birth certificate is Wisconsin. But we grew up in a little farm town until I was 9 and then moved to a little bigger town. But when I moved to Chicago, it was a very, exciting time to be there. And I say that because places like Steppenwolf and Remains and even the St. Nicholas Theater were in operation, and as a first-year student, I could go and usher at all of these places. So I got to see, Malkovich and Sinise and Jeff Perry and all those folks from Steppenwolf when they were doing True West and Baum and Gilead and Waiting for Lefty and all these amazing shows in their early days before they moved to the big theater and had the success that they did. And it was fascinating to see them.
I know you did a lot of theater in Chicago, but what's really impressive is that you were given a starring role in your own TV show, The Untouchables, without having done a whole lot of TV shows or movies. How did you get the role?
I was very fortunate. The way that worked was the woman that was doing the local casting in Chicago was a casting director named Jane Alderman, and she happened to also have taught at DePaul. So she taught my audition class when I was in, I think, the second and third years of DePaul. And she always brought me in for things, and she did in this case. She brought me in for the role of Elliot Ness's uncle or something, which I was a little young for. But I did it, and the producers saw me, and they were kind of like, he might be a good Elliot Ness. And it took a while. Paramount was not a fan. They fought casting an unknown actor tooth and nail, as they did with Al Pacino with The Godfather. They didn't want him either, which I thought Paramount has a good track record. And it took some doing, but eventually, they flew me out to LA for the test. And then there was a long wait, and they finally cast me. But even after they cast me, there were still people at Paramount that weren't settled on me until really the second year of the series. So it was an uphill climb.
Well, I'm glad they made the right choice. Do you think your familiarity with Chicago helped you in your portrayal
Absolutely.
of Elliot Ness?
Absolutely. Yeah. Chris Crow, who was the executive producer on that, he had come off of working with Michael Mann on Miami Vice and shows like that. And he was, a wild man. And he did things his own way. And he was absolutely, he loved the fact that I was a Chicago guy, that I was a family guy, that, when I talked about the city being taken over, that it meant something personal to me, which it did. My mother talks about how there was one of the gangsters was shot in her back alley when she was growing up, and her brother ran out and dipped a handkerchief in the blood so he could have a souvenir. And so it's like I have a personal connection to some of that gangland stuff. So I came by it naturally.
It's very cool. Now, as you know, Elliot Ness was played by Robert Stack in the original
Mhm.
series, and Kevin Costner played him in the movie. Did either of those performances have an impact on your interpretation of Elliot Ness?
Oh, absolutely. I think that our series, initially at least, was written more along the lines, the pilot and that stuff was written more in line with the De Palma movie. They established a pretty big ensemble of actors. John Rhys Davis was playing the role that Sean Connery had played, more or less, although they changed the first name. The woman who played my wife was a lovely redhead, as was Kevin Costner's wife. She is still my wife, as a matter of fact, Nancy Everhard. But as the series went along, it shifted to more of the model that maybe the Robert Stack series had. They wanted to go with sort of standalone episodes. So it became more of a Ness on one side, Capone on the other side, and a guest cast going through the middle of it. And unfortunately, they really didn't feature this amazing ensemble of actors that we had, and it was really frustrating for people like David James Elliott and Michael Horse and Nancy and John Reese and those folks that were just being underutilized. But that's what they chose to do.
Well, just to tell you what an Untouchables nerd I am, I
Mhm.
wrote to the network when the series ended after 2 seasons, and I got this letter back that said, we ended the series because there was no more story left to tell after Al Capone went to jail. I don't think that's necessarily true, do you?
No, and the only reason they had Capone go to jail, well, there were a couple of reasons, was that Bill Forsyth was not going to stick around for another season. Paramount was undergoing some massive changes of its own. Ownership was changing hands. And, with the original series, with the Robert Stack series, Capone was, I think, who was it? Neville Brand played Capone. He left the series pretty early, and they just went with Ma Barker and all those other crazy, colorful villains, which they certainly could have done. And they were, the Paul who played Nitty, blanking on his last name, wonderful actor. He was looking forward to a third season because it would have featured him more. He was really underutilized, but the numbers were not good. The show was so violent, and because it was going straight to syndication, like in Chicago, we would play at 1 in the morning, you know, on a Sunday, I think, which you're just not going to get a lot of audience that way. But it was, this was before parental advisories and that sort of stuff. It was before streaming. I think in the streaming world, the show would have done much better, but that wasn't the case.
Oh, for sure. Now, in 1994, you appeared in a season 7 episode of Roseanne called Maybe Baby. You played the doctor. I've been told by more than a few actors who've appeared on our show that the atmosphere on that set was tense and unhappy. What was your experience?
Yeah, that would be, yeah, it was, you know, at that point, she was not calling the writers by name. She just assigned them numbers. And then when they were fired, whoever came in just got that number. So it was a really demeaning experience for the writers. As an actor, I remember we did a read through, a table read, and she didn't like the script, so she just, said some nasty things to the writers and then left. And, and it was very common that this happened. And they kind of said, well, stay by your phones and we'll let you know whether we're going to do this episode or not. And they called later in the day and said, we are. And so I showed up for work. And so you start on a Monday. The table read was on a Monday. This was Tuesday. And for Tuesday, Wednesday, there was a woman that had a script that was Roseanne, and the blocking and all that was figured out with the woman that was covering for Roseanne. And then on Thursday was the kind of the dress rehearsal, and they would even shoot some things. So Roseanne was there, and it was the first that I worked with her. And, we did our scene a few times, and then we took a break, and I was just sitting making notes in my script, and she was the only other person on the set at that point. She was sitting over there, and at one point I looked up and I said, "Good morning." And she just looked at me and went, "Eh." And that was the only thing she said to me all week.
I hope you didn't have a similar experience on all the other shows that you guest starred on.
No, no, but I think it was my second thing that I did when I moved to LA. The very first thing was a episode of Murphy Brown, which was lovely, great group. Although that was a surprisingly tense set in some respects too. But Roseanne was, the whole cast minus Roseanne would go to a bar after the Friday night shoot and just sort of lick their wounds. But it was tough. It was tough. For me, it was not a big deal because it was just a couple of days. But, in a lot of ways, my heart went out to the folks that were regulars on that. But, they've obviously done very well over the years with it.
Well, they earned it. In 1998, Tom, you co-starred in a wonderful miniseries called From the Earth to the Moon. You played the astronaut Harrison Schmidt, who's the most recent living person and the only person without a background in military aviation to have walked on the moon. So I've got to ask you, did you get to meet him when you were preparing for the role?
I feel like I did. I didn't meet him in person, but he was so wonderful. I called and talked to him many times, and it was really just, I mean, as a kid growing up in that era, I remember I had a young manager at the time, and I was shooting this pilot, this awful David Caruso thing, his first thing, on TV back after his film career just didn't take off. And he was very difficult to work with, but the dates for From the Earth to the Moon overlapped just by a little bit. And I was really wanting to do From the Earth to the Moon. And I remember my young manager saying, well, I don't know. I mean, does this astronaut stuff do it for you? And I was just like, wow, there's a generational shift here because, there's nothing in my mind that would be more fascinating than to do that. And
But
so
you never got to meet him.
no, but I spoke to him very specifically. Our episode was they wanted to show for the first and only time astronauts getting ready for a spacewalk. And, that's a life and death proposition because you've got to get dressed in a very specific way so that everything is airlocked and you'll be safe to go out in this very hostile environment. So, they were showing that in our episode, and I just had questions. For instance, when you came in from the spacewalk, well, I should say I guess they called it a lunar excursion. What did you do with your suits? Because they would be covered with moon dust, which the static electricity was crazy. You would just get all this black gray dust on your spacesuit. So they had a big bag, a big nylon black bag. You'd throw your suits in there so you wouldn't get dust all over the inside of the cabin. And then I said, well, what do you do with the bag after that? And he's like, I don't know, Tom. You're asking me questions from 30, 40 years ago. And so we left it at that. And about 15 minutes later, he called back and he said, okay, I remember now. The bag got stashed at night under my bunk. And they, he and Eugene Cernan were the ones that spent the longest time on the moon. That still is the record. They were there for 3 days. And he said he really got a feeling of just being, yeah, time to go to work, get up and go to work on the moon. But even just being able to talk to him about that stuff was just, it was one of the great pleasures, that whole series. I mean, it was insane to work on. It was so ambitious, but what a great group of, just along the line, the great cast. Tom Hanks was executive producing, and he actually wrote the episode that I did, and was very, like, I had some thoughts about the writing, and I proposed shifting. I don't know if you remember in the episode, there's some interviews with us as older men. And I said, what about, because they were done individually. There was, Danny was playing Eugene Cernan, and they would shoot him and then shoot me, was how it was originally written. I said, what about if we're together so that we get some back and forth stuff? And Tom was like, that sounds great, write it up. And so I actually just wrote a version of that, sent it to him, and that's what ended up, which I thought, how collaborative is that? That does not happen very often. In fact, I think that's the only time that's happened for me.
But it really was a great idea. Did he ever tell you? I mean, Harrison Schmidt, did he ever tell you what he thought of the show?
He liked it very much. We were set up, my wife and I were going to take the train out there. He lived in New Mexico at the time. And we had a trip planned where we were going to meet him and his wife. And then something came up and I had to go somewhere to shoot something else, and we weren't able to do that trip. So we never connected.
Now, when I was doing my research, I learned that you have always been a student of history. So I would imagine that playing Abraham Lincoln in Saving Lincoln, which is such a monumental role to play, must have been very special for you. But how did you prepare for that role?
Well, I'm fortunate in that I grew up in Illinois. So, I've heard Tommy Lee Jones interviewed and talking about how there's a connection that an actor has to the dirt that they grew up in. And I do feel connected. I grew up in this little town practically on the Wisconsin border, but we had a creek that flowed through it, very dark, rich soil. And what I did for the research was I went to Springfield and Saginaw and New Salem and those areas along the Saginaw River there, which he actually floated little barges down and would go all the way down to the Mississippi. And it was like, yeah, this is the same state that I grew up in. I felt very connected to that, and it's an interesting state. It still is an interesting state because if you go really south of Chicago, it starts to get very southern. Not starts. It's you might as well be in the South. The way people speak, very agricultural, and it's a state that in a way is a microcosm of the whole United States. Downstaters have a hard time with Chicagoans and vice versa, very different values. And that was stuff that he was negotiating as a young man, and then as a state legislator, congressman. He, was very familiar with that ways of negotiating with people that didn't agree with you from a very young age, which, he came in and as president, and obviously the most divisive time so far in our country's history.
So when you take a role that's already been played by Henry Fonda, Sam Waterston, Daniel Day-Lewis, probably many others, do you get any tips from any of those other performances?
I guess I would say that I try to, we were shooting that pretty much the same time that Daniel Day-Lewis was shooting with Spielberg on that, which was obviously going to be a much bigger movie. And I know the producers on that. They're wonderful producers. I don't really study anyone else's performances. For me, it's about going to the text and doing my research and really finding my own avenue, my own way of coming to that person, what it is that resonates. And for me, it was really with Abraham Lincoln, it was about family. It was about his family, the issues that he was having. I mean, having a child die when you're in office is shattering experience at a time when the nation itself was, being shattered and young men were dying hundreds of thousands.
Well,
You know?
what I really loved about Saving Lincoln is that it tells a story that wasn't very well known at all
Yeah.
about Lincoln's other law partner and bodyguard, Ward Hill Lamon, who was
Mhm.
not present when Lincoln was shot because Lincoln sent him out of town. The entire film was shot on a green screen stage with no real sets. What was that
Yeah.
experience like?
It was early on in the process. For me, it felt very at home because it was almost like doing a play. We were on the same stage. They would change furniture, for instance, but we were on the same stage in front of a green screen. And we could go and walk and look at the monitors, and you would see the backgrounds, proposed backgrounds that they would have. So you would have a sense, oh, okay, that's what this scene is going to look like. It was fascinating. But it had a certain stage theatrical quality about it.
So, of course, I have to ask you about Everwood Tom. For 4 years, you played the beloved Dr. Harold Abbott. My director of programming, Robert Monaghan, is of the firm belief that you were channeling Jimmy Stewart in that performance. Is there any truth to that?
It's funny. I mean, that comparison has come up since I was in high school. I remember getting reviews as a high schooler, and at that time, I mean, I kind of knew who Jimmy Stewart was, but like there was a period where It's a Wonderful Life was never shown on TV when I was a kid. Like there was some reason that it wasn't on TV, some RKO issue or something. I can't remember. So I just wasn't as familiar. To me, Jimmy Stewart was this old guy that would show up on the Johnny Carson show and read silly poems that he had written. I didn't really know him as a young man, but as I grew older, it was kind of like, oh yeah, I can see the comparison. No, that is not something that I actively, lean into at all. To me, I mean, Greg Berlanti always talked about Harold Abbott having more of a Jack Lemmon quality, which I thought that made sense to me. Just that kind of, the vinegar that Jack Lemmon would bring to a role where he just did it was just oh, the frustration that he would feel. That was very much Harold Abbott's, you know, just the whole idea of this famous doctor coming to town and upending his entire position in the stratosphere was something that's where I found that.
How much of the real Tom Amandes is there in Dr. Harold Abbott?
Oh, probably more than I would want to admit to. But at the same time, and what Greg always talked about with that role was that the saving grace was how much he loved his kids. And I certainly connect with that. When push came to shove, it was, however much of a pain in the ass he could be when it came to making decisions about his kids, he was always I think, very good.
Oh, yeah. We all felt that you became our friend when we watched that show.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah,
share some memories of working with the late, great Treat
yeah,
Williams?
yeah. I was just watching the Emmys, and you know, I saw his wife Pam and his son Gil and his daughter Ellie at the Emmys. Treat did not win the award, but of course, I watched all of the Swan, Truman Capote and the Swans, which was Treat's last work. Yeah, it's been really hard. I mean, Treat was one of my very best friends, and that really is something, it's really a testament to him because, when you work on a show and then you finish it up, of course you stay in touch with people for the most part. Sometimes you don't, but Treat really went out of his way to stay in touch with me. And over the years that became more and more of a friendship, way more so than when we were working together. And we would go out to his place in Vermont. The month before he died, he and Pam came to our place here in LA. We had a lovely dinner together, and we're being silly together, and we always had a lot of fun together. And I think I could make him laugh. and we had a group of friends from Park City, which is where we lived when we shot at Everwood. And they were not showbiz friends. They were just all our kids went to school together. When we moved there, our son was 3. And so he started preschool and then started kindergarten and first grade and second grade. And so we have, there's 4 couples that all hung out together then and are still very close now. And in fact, we were staying with one of those couples in Park City. And then, and I had spoken to Treat. This was the Friday before he died. I spoke to him on Friday as we were going up to Park City, and he was filling me in on John Beasley's death. John had died shortly before that, and it was a bit of a mystery. And Treat had reached out to John's wife, Judy, and got the story on how John had passed away. So he was filling me in on that. And we had a lovely talk as we were driving up to Park City. He was in Vermont at the time and stayed with, mutual friends. And then we went to Park City to stay at another friend's house. And almost, a couple hours later, got a call from our friend Robert that Treat had died. And it was the most shocking thing in the world. We had just taken a silly photo together and sent it to him and Pam, and just absolutely shocking. I'm still not okay about it at all.
Oh, it was a terrible, terrible loss. He was a wonderful person and incredibly talented. I think that one of the reasons why Everwood was such a beloved series, in my opinion, is because there was a unique and very mature sensitivity about family relationships. And especially dealing with life and death across generations. I mean, I'm still trying to recover from Irvs Funeral. That was an unforgettable episode, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I watched that. I think I tried to watch it after Treat died, and was like, I can't watch this. But yeah, that was, and I think that was Greg's thought from the beginning, was that it would be that story, that it would embrace, all generations, that it wouldn't just be a teen drama. And of course the WB, and then, we didn't survive the merger, because the woman that took over when the WB and the CW merged, or was it or UPN, when they merged, the woman that took over was not a fan of the show and worked very hard to find some way of not having us on the air, and succeeded.
Well, there were millions of fans who were terribly upset when Everwood was canceled after season 4. As
and
you
it was
pointed
doing
out,
pretty well. It
was doing really well. And it was simply because of a merger that created the CW network in 2006. How did you deal with that cancellation personally?
I've been through cancellations before, and until I'm guaranteed, I don't lean too far in that direction. If things get picked up, that's great. I'll sort of assume that they're not until they absolutely are. But in this case, they were asking for our tuck sizes for the upfronts and all of that, and it looked really good. Seventh Heaven had just gone off the air, so we knew that slot was open for us. But I think her name was Dawn Ostroff, was just so not a fan of Everwood that she reached out to the Seventh Heaven folk and said, "Can you guys come back for even a short series?" And they agreed to. And once we heard that it was happening, I was like, that doesn't bode well. And then sure enough, we were not asked back for a 5th season, which was kind of heartbreaking, because we were very close to 100 episodes, which I've never had the experience of hitting 100. I think we got like 90 or 92 episodes or something like that. So it would have been fun to have done another season, but was not meant to be.
It's one more example of what I always like to say, which is that the visionaries in Hollywood have no vision.
They're trying to figure stuff out, and they've got to make a lot of difficult choices. It didn't make us happy, but there it was.
Well, in 2007, it's a tough business. In 2007, you appeared in an episode in season 6 of one of my all-time favorite comedy shows, Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Mhm.
For all those trivia buffs out there, the episode was called The Lefty Call.
Mhm.
What was it like working with Larry David?
It was just a blast. And I would kind of think it's pretty much what you would imagine it would be like. Yeah, it was even the audition. Allison Jones casts that. She's wonderful. But you would show up at the audition, and then, of course, there's no script. You would get not even a sheet of paper. It was like a slip of paper about that big. Like, I don't know why they couldn't, they would print it a bunch of times and slice it into little strips. And it said, as I recall, it said something like, "You are the father of 9 children. You and your wife go out to lunch with Larry and Cheryl, and he teases your wife mercilessly about, how many kids she has, and you take offense." I think that's pretty much what it said. And at the audition, you just go in and Larry's sitting at a table with Cheryl, and he's like, "Yeah, how you doing?" It's just Larry David doing Larry David. And I think I started off by saying, well, I think I've got a bit of an advantage on this role. I'm actually the middle of 11 children. And he just went, "Oh my God, your mother, is she insane?" And we talked for half an hour. And at some point he kind of went, "I guess we should try and do a scene or something." And we did, and it was great. And I came out going, well, I don't know if I got it. I'm pretty sure I did, but it was a lot of fun. And I think, I don't know, coming from Chicago, and I've played in a few bands and stuff where you're sort of improving and stuff like that. It's sort of in the water in Chicago. You know how to improv. It's just, you know, not that big a thing. And I've done a number of things where I've had to use my improv skills. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that as a way of working. Even on Parenthood, when we would shoot that, we would shoot the script as written, and then they would kind of go, "Okay, just say whatever you want in this." And we would do sort of an improv version of that scene. But Curb was very much, straight improv, lots of overlapping dialogue. It was it was a lot of fun to shoot, but it was a little chaotic in that they didn't even have a call sheet that you got. So you'd show up at the set, and I remember at one point I showed up, I did my scene, like the restaurant scene, and nobody told me anything. I hadn't seen a call sheet, and I took off my makeup. I didn't even think we had makeup, honestly. Changed out of my wardrobe and got in my car and was driving off, and just kind of as an afterthought rolled down the window and said, "All right, well, let me know." And they said, "Yeah, it should be about 20 minutes." And I was like, "What is going to be in 20 minutes? Or your next scene?" I was like, I stopped the car. I was like, "Okay, I didn't know this. Didn't know there was another scene or that we were shooting it today. So what is this?" "Oh, yeah, I don't know, but hang tight. I mean, if you want to go get a cup of coffee or something. But it was that kind of, it was very loose and a lot of fun. But, you know, invariably you end up shooting more than ends up on screen. My favorite scene that I did with Larry, it was called the Lefty Call because his left ear is bad, and that's the ear that he uses for his phone. So he tries to use his right ear, and it's just wrong. So anytime he makes a phone call, in his way, he can't properly execute a phone call. So at one point, I call him up, and I'm just reaming him about this argument that he had about my wife, and then her father is his barber, and he lets him have it as well. And so it was just a long phone call where I just read him the riot act, and it was very funny. I got him. I got him a couple of times on that, which I was very proud of. But then when he brought me in for some looping later, and looped the restaurant scene and a couple of things that he said as we're finishing up. I said, "Well, I can't wait to see the episode." And he said, "We cut the phone call." And I went, "Ugh." He said, "No, no, 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 you got to understand. It was all about the flow. yeah, I said, Larry, it's fine. It's your show. No, it's just it was wonderful. What you did was great. It was so good. It was so good, and the funny, but the flow of that. I'm Larry. It's fine. I'm disappointed, but and he just kept trying to explain why exactly it was cut, which I thought was classic Larry David. It was like a scene after the show had shot.
Actually, that would have made a good episode to have him explain to a guest star why one of the better
Ice cutting
scenes
was,
got
yeah,
cut.
it was classic.
You were in 3 episodes of Big Love. You played State Representative Roy Colburn, season 4,
Yeah,
and you worked with another late great star, Bill
yeah,
Paxton.
yeah.
Did you have fun on that show?
Oh yeah. That was a really, really well done show. And I mean, for me, I had just spent 5 years living in Utah, so I was very familiar with the Mormons and even polygamists. There were actually polygamists in Park City, which was kind of surprising to hear, but there it's still a thing up that way. It's a little more closeted now than it once was, and there are still areas where it's still pretty much out in the open. It's a strange thing, but it's all, I don't know why it's been a fascination of mine. So to be able to do that show was really fun, and working with Bill was fun too. Although I'm always in these scenes, I've done this numerous times where I'm the candidate who loses, whether it was Scandal or Big Love. What else? I've done numerous candidates who lose. Really fun show. But again, that was a show they were very guarded about the scripts. They wouldn't let you read them ahead of time unless you drove out to Santa Clarita and sat in an office with the script, which I would do because I wanted to know what the script was. I've always, I always do my research and want to know where the story's going and how my part fits into it. And, just doing your scenes leaves questions. It's like, well, what happened before this? And I remember one time, so I went off to got the script in the secret room and was sitting there reading it. And the script was next to me was another script. And I opened it up and I realized it was Chloe Sevigny's personal script. And I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm like looking at some notes that she's written. As an actor, it's kind of like, ooh, this is sort of cool. And she walked in on me and she just like caught me red-handed. She's like, are you looking at my script? And I'm like, yes, I'm sorry. She's like, give that to me. She just took it and went out. I still feel bad, but I'd do it again in a minute.
Oh my God, anybody would. Now, of course, I have to ask you about Noah Cutler, better known as Calculator in Arrow.
Yes.
He was Felicity's long lost father, a career cyber criminal with advanced computer hacking skills, which of course he used to help Felicity stop Hive from attaining world domination.
That's right.
There was a really interesting, very complicated father-daughter relationship. Did you
Yeah.
did you like that?
Yeah, that was and I'm having gone through a divorce and had daughters that had to pay the price for that. That's always very difficult on kids. That was something that I very much connected with.
Well, as I'm thinking of your performance as Noah Cutler, it strikes me that you've played a lot of very interesting fathers with some really cool young actors like the Olsen twins and Billboard Dad, Kate Beckinsale and Brokedown Palace, Chris Pratt and Emily Van Camp in Everwood, and of course, Emily Bett Rickards in Arrow, among others.
Yeah.
There's an old saying that you should never work with children or animals, but obviously you don't agree with that, right?
No. I mean, I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of really talented young people, and it's always exciting to see them, go on and do amazing things. Chris brought me in to play his father-in-law on The Terminal List the first season, and it was the first time that I had seen him in a while. But it's always just a really fun time to see him. And Emily is a neighbor, so when I'm on my bicycle route, I bike past her house and I'll see her from time to time. I saw her last week. She got a huge kick out of the beard. She had not seen the beard. And it's really lovely Greg Smith and I have stayed in touch as well. A lot of the Everwood folks we've stayed in touch with as well. But yeah, just so much fun to see people grow up and continue to do really great work.
Yeah, you've worked with a lot of talented kids. You mentioned Scandal. You played Governor Samuel Reston.
Mhm.
You mentioned that when you were working on Big Love, they were really secretive about the script. I
Mhm.
know that with Scandal, I mean, the great fun of watching Scandal is that nothing is as it seems. No one means what they say. There's all these machinations. Were
And
you,
everybody will kill someone.
yeah, were you kept in the dark about the storylines until you actually got the script?
Well, so with Scandal, and I think with a lot of Shonda's shows, the read-throughs are just an event. And with Scandal, they were some of my favorite experiences as an actor. And you were expected to be at the read-throughs. Read-throughs on a show are very difficult to engineer. You have to have producers that really, really are invested in doing a read-through because it's hard to get all your actors together. Sometimes they're off, out of town because they're not shooting that next 4 or 5 days or whatever, or they're doing press stuff or whatever. Everwood always had read-throughs, and I felt like it was so important. It really gave us a sense of what each show was going to be, but it also brought us together. And the same with Scandal, and they were just legendary. They were so much fun, and no one was allowed to read the script before the read through. So you were reading it cold, and everyone was experiencing the surprises as they happened. Shonda would even do mean things like, because people would skip sometimes to the end of the script, just as we were sitting there, like you'd sit down at the table and people would just go right to the end just to see how it ended. And she would put in fake ending pages where a character died that just to be mean. He takes his last breath. I think that was Josh's character. He takes his last breath and dies or something. And they were amazing. The read-throughs were amazing. And that was when we would be introduced to the script. But they were very secretive and they didn't want you obviously posting anything or that sort of stuff.
Well, you've guest starred on so many TV shows over the years.
Yeah.
What's it like to walk on the set of a well-established show? There's already a rhythm. These people all know each other. You're the new guy. Are they welcoming to you on the set?
It varies widely and it'll vary within a show. I remember exactly when I was shooting ER because my wife and I had our son, so he's about to turn 26. And it'll be 26 years ago. And it was lovely. It was one of those things. I remember I was up for two things, both of which Noah Wyle was in. I was up for a role in Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was a miniseries that he had done about, the creation of Microsoft and Apple and that sort of stuff. So they wanted me for a role on that, and then they wanted me for a role on ER. And I told both of them, I said, I'm happy to do these roles, but you got to know we're expecting if I got to leave, I got to leave. And Pirates of Silicon Valley were like, we can't deal with that. I was like, okay, no problem. You know, and ER was like, cool. When do you think you're going to have the baby? It was like, well, we don't know. And every time I would go in, they were like, do you think it's going to happen today? I think they really wanted it to happen while I was on the set because they wanted that excitement or something. I don't know. Jonathan Kaplan was the executive producer on it, and he was so lovely. He went on to direct me in Brokedown Palace. But everybody, the 80s and all that were so lovely. But some of the cast, Eric LaSalle was pretty much what you'd imagine him to be like. I think when I met him on the set, he was kind of like, how you doing? And that was about the extent of it. Whereas Tony was just like, hey, I'm Tony, like you wouldn't know who Dr. Green was. So great to have you here. And I think he was very appreciative to have really good guest cast. I know I always tried to do that on shows that I've done, because it's one of the hardest gigs in show business because you are coming into an established thing. You don't know what the set's going to be like. Sometimes it's a difficult shooting experience, and sometimes it's tricky scripts and stuff like that. And I work really, really hard when I'm doing those things because I want to come in, you know, and just know it backwards and forwards because I'm not on my home court, essentially. It's like I'm the visiting team in some ways, so I've got to work extra hard. But it's a good challenge. It's fun.
When you watch yourself on screen, are you able to be objective and appreciate your own performance, or do you get hypercritical?
Both, I think. And, it's just one of those things where, I think over the years, I've learned to just sort of watch and kind of go, relax. I mean, I'm always shocked by how old I am, because I feel like I'm 30 years old, and that is just not the case, Harvey. I don't know how that happens. And even just like, I have this beard now, which is not a choice that I would make, but.
Are you going to tell us about that beard and what it's for? Are you allowed?
I am, of course I am. No, so I'm in the midst of a run of playing Gandalf the Wizard in Lord of the Rings, the musical. So we played this summer in Chicago, and I'm just back in LA after that run, and we're moving the production to New Zealand, starting at the end of October through into December.
All right, all of our viewers in New Zealand, you heard it here first. Get your tickets to see Tom Amandes. Well, Tom, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and having this opportunity to celebrate your amazing career.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for all the great performances. Thank you for taking the time to appear on our show, Tom.
It's a pleasure.
Our guest has been the incomparable actor and director, Tom Amandes. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.